You're becoming a burden, Mom. We can't keep revolving our lives around your needs. If you're watching this, please subscribe and let me know where you're watching from in the comments. What I'm about to share happened at my 72nd birthday dinner, and it changed everything. I promise you, the justice that followed was worth every moment of heartbreak. The Bella Court restaurant had always been my favorite. Elegant, intimate, with soft lighting that made everyone look years younger. I'd made reservations for 3. My treat, of course, hoping to celebrate not just my birthday, but also to discuss some important family matters. At 72, I'd learned that conversations about the future shouldn't be postponed. Marcus arrived 23 minutes late, his Italian leather shoes clicking against the marble floor as he hurried to our table. At 45, my son still carried himself with the confidence of someone who'd never truly struggled, his designer suit impeccable despite his claims of a hectic day. "Happy birthday, Mom. Sorry I'm late, but you know how crazy work gets," he said, kissing my cheek before settling into his chair. The scent of his expensive cologne, the kind that costs more than some people's monthly groceries, filled the space between us. Jessica followed, her red-soled heels announcing her approach. My daughter-in-law had always been beautiful in that polished, high-maintenance way that required constant financial investment. Tonight she wore a dress I recognized from a boutique window, price tag still fresh in my memory at $800. "Amelia, you look lovely," she said, though her smile never quite reached her eyes. "That story you told last week about your old job was so quaint. Things were so different back then, weren't they?" I felt the first prick of disappointment. Quaint, as if my 40 years building corporate portfolios was some charming hobby, rather than the foundation that had built their comfortable lives. The evening progressed with forced cheerfulness. Marcus ordered the most expensive bottle of wine without glancing at the price, while Jessica photographed her artisanal salmon for social media. I watched them, these people I'd raised and supported, and felt an uncomfortable distance growing. "I've been thinking about updating my will," I mentioned casually as we waited for dessert. "And I wanted to discuss—" "Mom, do we really need to talk about this stuff tonight?" Marcus interrupted, his voice sharp with irritation. "It's your birthday. Can't we just enjoy dinner without getting into all that heavy family business?" "But it is family business, sweetheart. I want to make sure—" "You want to make sure what? That we're performing properly for our inheritance?" His voice had risen, drawing glances from nearby tables. "Mom, you're becoming a burden. We have our own lives to live. We can't keep revolving everything around your needs and your constant need for attention." The words hit me like a physical blow. A burden. After everything I'd given, everything I'd sacrificed, everything I'd provided, I was a burden. Excuse me," I managed, standing on unsteady legs. "I need to use the restroom." In the bathroom, I gripped the marble countertop, staring at my reflection. 72 years old, still sharp, still capable, but in my son's eyes, a burden. I took several deep breaths, composing myself before returning to the table. But as I approached, I heard their voices, low and urgent. "Once we get the inheritance, we can finally buy that house in the Hamptons," Jessica was saying. "I mean, how much longer can she really live? And that house alone is worth $800,000. "The sooner we can get power of attorney, the better," Marcus replied. "All this money just sitting there while we're struggling with our MO? Bert Gage." I stood frozen, hidden behind a decorative pillar, listening to my life being dissected like a business transaction. They weren't just dismissive, they were calculating, planning, waiting. When I returned to the table, I wore my brightest smile. "Sorry about that. Now what were we discussing?" But something fundamental had shifted inside me. For 40 years, I'd been Amelia Patterson, Senior Vice President of Corporate Finance at Meridian Holdings. I'd managed portfolios worth hundreds of millions, navigated hostile takeovers, and built wealth through careful analysis and strategic thinking. They saw a foolish old woman. They had no idea they'd just awakened something far more dangerous. A woman who knew exactly how to protect her assets and who had the intelligence, resources, and connections to do it. The birthday dinner ended with hugs and promises to call soon. But as I watched Marcus and Jessica drive away in the BMW I'd helped them purchase, I knew this would be the last time I played the role of naive, generous mother. The lioness was awake now, and she was done being prey. The drive home felt endless, Streetlights blurred past my windshield as I processed what had just happened. 43 years of marriage to Robert, 27 years raising Marcus, and this was what I had to show for it. Being called a burden by the child I'd sacrificed everything for. If you're experiencing something similar with your own family, please subscribe to this channel. You're not alone, and I want you to know that your story matters too. My house stood quiet in the darkness. The Tudor-style home Robert and I had bought in 1987 when Marcus was 12. Every room held memories, but tonight they felt different. Tainted by the knowledge that my son saw it all as nothing more than dollar signs. I poured myself a glass of the good wine, the 1998 Bordeaux Robert had been saving for a special occasion that never came before his heart attack 3 years ago. Tonight felt special enough, though not in the way he'd imagined. Settling into Robert's leather chair in the study, I let myself remember his warnings from years past. "Amelia, you're spoiling that boy," he'd said countless times. "Money without earning it builds character like sugar builds muscle. It doesn't." But I'd wanted Marcus to have opportunities we'd never had. Private schools, European summers, a college fund that meant he graduated debt-free while his friends struggled with loans. I'd thought I was giving him advantages. Instead, I'd apparently raised someone who saw kindness as weakness and generosity as obligation. My phone buzzed. A text from Marcus. "Mom, you're overreacting. We just want what's best for you. Let's talk tomorrow when you're not being so dramatic." Dramatic. The word stung almost as much as burden. In corporate boardrooms, they'd called me many things. Tough, brilliant, uncompromising, but never dramatic. I'd built my reputation on emotional control and strategic thinking. I walked to my home office, a converted bedroom that most people never saw. Behind the desk, a wall safe held documents that would surprise anyone who thought they knew Amelia Patterson's financial situation. I pulled out my portfolio summary, running my fingers over numbers that represented decades of careful planning. $2.3 million in liquid assets. The house, valued at $1.2 million. Investment properties in 3 states, generating rental income. A life insurance policy worth $500,000. Stock options from Meridian that had matured into a small fortune. Retirement accounts that had grown far beyond what I'd ever told Marcus. For years, I'd downplayed my wealth, wanting him to build his own success rather than coast on expectations. I'd helped when he claimed to struggle. Mortgage payments when his business hit rough patches. Car loans when his credit wasn't quite good enough. Credit card payments when Jessica's shopping habits exceeded their budget. But I'd never told him the full scope of what he stood to inherit. Now I wondered if that had been wisdom or foolishness. I reached for my phone and dialed a number I'd known by heart for 26 years. "Patricia, it's Amelia. I know it's late, but I need to make some changes to my estate planning. Significant changes." Patricia Chen had been my attorney since 1998, when she was a junior associate handling my first real estate transaction. Now, she was a partner in one of the city's most respected firms, specializing in estate law and asset protection. More importantly, she was one of the few people who knew the true extent of my financial position. "Amelia, is everything all right? You sound upset." "I've just had what you might call a revelation about my family's true feelings toward me," I said, choosing my words carefully. "And I need to discuss some protective measures." "Of course. Can you come in tomorrow morning? Say 10 o'clock? "Perfect. Patricia, I also need you to recommend a private investigator, someone discreet and thorough." There was a pause. "That's quite a departure from estate planning. May I ask what's prompted this?" "Let's just say I've discovered I don't know my own son as well as I thought I did. 40 years building a portfolio, and they think I'm just a foolish old woman who doesn't understand money. They clearly don't know you very well, do they?" After hanging up, I opened my laptop and began researching local charities. If Marcus and Jessica thought my money was better spent on Hampton's houses than on supporting the woman who'd earned it, perhaps it was time to explore other options. The Sunrise Senior Center, where I'd been volunteering for 2 years, appeared first in my search. I'd seen the genuine need there, seniors struggling with fixed incomes, isolation, medical expenses, people who would never call me a burden, who appreciated wisdom and experience rather than seeing them as inconveniences. the literacy program at the public library, helping adults learn to read, the domestic violence shelter where women rebuilt their lives from nothing, the food bank that fed families whose children might otherwise go hungry, the scholarship fund for first-generation college students who worked 3 jobs to afford textbooks, organizations that understood the value of money because they'd watched people suffer without it. My phone buzzed again. Another text from Marcus. "Mom, let's just forget about tonight. You know how stressful work has been. We're all family here. Family." The word felt hollow now, like something that had lost its meaning through overuse and underappreciation. I poured another glass of wine and began making lists. Not of assets to leave behind, but of evidence to gather. If my son wanted to treat me like a foolish old woman whose only value was her bank account, then perhaps it was time to show him exactly how foolish it was to underestimate someone who'd spent 4 decades in corporate finance. By midnight, I had appointments scheduled with Patricia, contact information for 3 private investigators, and a detailed plan for documenting everything I'd given Marcus over the years. Every loan, every emergency payment, every luxury they'd enjoyed while calling me dramatic and burdensome. Tomorrow, the real work would begin. Tonight, I'd allow myself one more glass of wine and the bitter satisfaction of knowing that the biggest financial miscalculation of Marcus's life would be assuming his mother was too naive to protect herself. The sleeping lioness was awake now, and she remembered exactly how to hunt. Patricia's office occupied an entire floor of downtown's most prestigious building, its floor-to-ceiling windows offering views of the city I'd helped build through decades of strategic investments. At 10 sharp, I sat across from her mahogany desk, watching my longtime friend and attorney review documents with the same meticulous attention that had made her one of the region's most respected estate lawyers. "Amelia, I have to ask, what exactly happened at this birthday dinner?" I recounted the evening's events, watching Patricia's expression shift from concern to professional outrage. At 62, she'd seen every variation of family greed, but something about my situation clearly struck a nerve. "Patricia, I want to understand exactly what legal protections I have," I said, leaning forward. "If they're already discussing power of attorney, I need to be prepared." She pulled out a thick folder I recognized. My estate file, carefully maintained and updated over the years. "Let's start with what you've already given Marcus. I've been tracking the loans and gifts for tax purposes. The numbers, laid out in neat columns, were staggering even to me. You've given Marcus over $180,000 in the past 3 years, Amelia. Did you realize it was that much?" I stared at the documentation. Car loan assistance, $35,000. Mortgage help during his business difficulties, $68,000. Credit card payments, $41,000. Emergency loans for various crises, $36,000. It was all there, meticulously recorded. None of it ever repaid despite promises. "I spent decades analyzing corporate books," I said slowly. "It's time I analyzed my own family with the same rigor." Patricia nodded approvingly. "Good. Now regarding power of attorney, as long as you're mentally competent, which you obviously are, no one can force that decision. But I recommend we document your competency thoroughly. Medical evaluations, cognitive assessments, anything that proves you're of sound mind. What about the estate itself? How quickly can we make changes?" "Immediately, if you're certain about your direction. But given what you've told me about their expectations, I'd suggest gathering more evidence first. Document their true feelings and intentions before making irreversible decisions." She reached into her desk drawer and pulled out a business card. "David Morrison. He's a private investigator I've worked with on several family dispute cases. Very discreet, very thorough. If you want to understand what Marcus and Jessica really think and plan, he can help." I studied the card. Simple, professional, no flashy promises or dramatic taglines. Perfect. "There's something else," Patricia continued. "I pulled Marcus's credit report as part of our general family financial review last year. He's been unemployed for 6 months, Amelia. Whatever he told you about work stress, he hasn't had a job since March." The revelation hit like ice water. 6 months of unemployment while maintaining their expensive lifestyle, taking money from me for emergencies while planning luxury purchases with my inheritance. And Jessica's spending? Patricia opened another file. Credit card statements you co-signed for during their mortgage application. In the past year alone, $73,000 in luxury purchases. Designer clothes, jewelry, spa treatments, restaurant bills that exceed most people's monthly salaries. I felt something cold and analytical settle over me. The same emotional detachment that had served me well during hostile corporate takeovers. This wasn't about hurt feelings anymore. This was about financial fraud, manipulation, and the systematic exploitation of parental love. I want to see everything, I said. Every loan, every gift, every instance where they've taken money under false pretenses. And I want Mr. Morrison to document their current lifestyle and future plans. Amelia, are you sure about this path? Once we start investigating family members, there's usually no going back to the way things were. I thought about Marcus's voice calling me a burden, Jessica's casual discussion of my death as a financial opportunity, their plans to claim I was mentally incompetent. Patricia, the way things were ended. The moment my son decided I was worth more dead than alive. Now I want to know exactly what I'm dealing with so I can protect myself accordingly. We spent the next hour reviewing legal strategies, asset protection trusts that would shield my wealth from manipulation, mental competency documentation that would prevent any power of attorney claims, estate modifications that could redirect inheritance based on behavior and circumstances. The most important thing, Patricia emphasized, is that any changes we make must be clearly motivated by their actions, not spite. We need documentation that shows their betrayal of trust, their financial deception, and their plans to exploit you. I left her office with a clear mission: gather evidence, document everything, and prepare for what might be the most important financial decision of my life. The corporate executive in me was fully engaged now, approaching this family crisis like any other business problem requiring analysis, strategy, and decisive action. Mr. Morrison's office was my next stop. If Marcus and Jessica wanted to treat me like a naive old woman while plotting behind my back, they were about to discover that underestimating Amelia Patterson was the most expensive mistake they'd ever make. The paper trail they'd created would become the rope they'd hang themselves with, and I had 40 years of experience in corporate investigations to make sure I didn't miss a single thread. David Morrison's office was nothing like the flashy detective agencies you see in movies. Located in a modest building near the courthouse, it felt more like an accountant's office than a private investigator's headquarters, which was exactly what I'd hoped for. At 58, Morrison had the quiet competence of someone who'd spent decades uncovering uncomfortable truths. Mrs. Patterson, Patricia Chen speaks very highly of your analytical skills, he said, reviewing the preliminary information I'd provided. This type of family financial investigation requires methodical documentation. Are you prepared for what we might discover? Mr. Morrison, I spent 40 years in corporate finance. I've seen what greed does to people. I'm prepared for anything except continued lies. He nodded approvingly. Good. I'll need authorization to conduct surveillance, record conversations where legally permissible, and investigate their financial activities. This will take several weeks to compile comprehensive evidence. Time is something I have plenty of. Money, too, if this investigation prevents it from being stolen through manipulation and fraud. Over the next 2 weeks, I began my own careful documentation while Morrison conducted his professional investigation. I started recording phone conversations with Marcus and Jessica, perfectly legal in our state with single-party consent. I documented every request for money, every excuse, every inconsistency in their stories. The results were both predictable and heartbreaking. Morrison's surveillance revealed Marcus spending his days at the country club, not searching for employment as he'd claimed. Jessica's shopping habits were even more extensive than Patricia's credit reports had suggested. Daily visits to high-end boutiques, followed by long lunches with friends, where she complained about being stuck, caring for an aging mother-in-law. But the most damaging evidence came from a dinner party they hosted while I was supposedly visiting my sister in Portland. Morrison's audio equipment, strategically placed with the help of a temporary catering worker, captured conversations that destroyed any remaining doubt about their true feelings. The old lady won't live forever. Jessica's voice came through clearly on the recording. That house alone is worth $800,000, and Marcus says there's probably another $1 million in investments she's never told us about. My mother always was secretive about money, Marcus replied, but she's getting more forgetful lately. Maybe it's time to start talking about power of attorney, for her own protection, of course. Their laughter made my stomach turn. Morrison's financial investigation revealed even more disturbing details. Marcus hadn't just been unemployed. He'd been fired for falsifying expense reports. His gambling problem, carefully hidden from me, had cost them nearly $50,000 in the past year. The emergency home repairs he'd called about weren't for their house. They were desperate attempts to cover gambling debts before creditors took legal action. Mrs. Patterson, I have to tell you, this is one of the more clear-cut cases I've seen, Morrison said during our follow-up meeting. They're systematically defrauding you while planning to claim mental incompetence if you resist their demands. The evidence was overwhelming. Falsified emergency claims, lies about employment, secret gambling debts, and recorded conversations planning my financial exploitation. But what hurt most was discovering the extent of their mockery and disrespect when they thought I couldn't hear. During this investigation period, I also spent time at the Sunrise Senior Center, where I'd been volunteering since Robert's death. The contrast was stark and revealing. Mrs. Patterson, you're such a blessing to our literacy program, said Margaret Williams, an 80-year-old former teacher learning to use computers. You explain things so patiently. Your family must be so proud of everything you've accomplished. These seniors, many struggling on fixed incomes, treated me with genuine respect and appreciation. They valued my experience, sought my advice, and never made me feel like a burden. The irony wasn't lost on me. Strangers showed me more consideration than my own son. Meanwhile, Marcus's demands continued escalating. Another call requesting $15,000 for emergency home repairs. Mom, this is really urgent. The foundation has structural damage, and if we don't fix it immediately, the whole house could be compromised. We wouldn't ask if we had any other choice. I agreed to provide the money, knowing full well it would fund gambling debts rather than repairs. But every lie created more evidence. Every manipulation further documented their systematic exploitation. Morrison's investigation also revealed their future plans in disturbing detail. They'd already contacted real estate agents about selling my house. Jessica had bookmarked luxury properties in the Hamptons, planning purchases with money they expected to inherit. They'd researched assisted living facilities, not for my comfort, but to reduce their caregiving obligations while maintaining access to my assets. The most chilling discovery was their research into elder law, specifically looking for ways to declare me mentally incompetent, despite clear evidence to the contrary. They'd found articles about age-related financial confusion and the need for family intervention when seniors make poor decisions. Armed with overwhelming evidence of their deception, manipulation, and plans for exploitation, I faced a decision that would determine the rest of my life. I could continue enabling their behavior, hoping family love might eventually triumph over greed. Or I could protect myself with the same strategic thinking that had built my wealth in the first place. The choice, when viewed through 40 years of corporate finance experience, was obvious. It was time to schedule one final family dinner. Not as the naive, generous mother they expected, but as the strategic financial executive they'd forgotten I'd always been. This time, I would be the one gathering intelligence while they revealed their true character. The investigation phase was complete. Now came the test that would determine whether blood relations meant more than respect, love, and basic human decency. I already suspected I knew the answer, but I needed to give them one final chance to probe me wrong. Sunday dinner had always been sacred in our family. Even after Robert died, I'd maintained the tradition, hoping to preserve some connection with Marcus, despite our growing distance. Today's dinner would be different. It would be their final examination, though they'd never know they were being tested. I spent the morning preparing Marcus's favorite meal, herb-crusted lamb with rosemary potatoes, the same dish I'd made for his birthday every year since he was 12. The irony wasn't lost on me, preparing a feast for people who saw me as nothing more than a source of money. The dining room looked perfect, with my grandmother's china and the crystal glasses Robert had given me for our 20th anniversary. Hidden beneath the table, a small recording device documented everything, legal in our state, and necessary given what Morrison's investigation had revealed. Marcus and Jessica arrived precisely at 1 o'clock. their punctuality unusual and immediately suspicious. Jessica wore another new outfit, a designer dress that cost more than many families spent on groceries in a month. Marcus carried flowers, something he hadn't done in years. "Mom, you look wonderful," he said, kissing my cheek with unusual enthusiasm. "Is that the lamb recipe? You know it's my absolute favorite." Their behavior throughout dinner was a masterclass in manipulation. Excessive compliments, unusual attentiveness, carefully crafted concern about my health and well-being. They asked about my volunteer work with genuine seeming interest, praised my cooking with exaggerated enthusiasm, and generally acted like the loving family I'd always hoped they'd be. "I've been thinking about my legacy and what really matters to me," I mentioned casually as we finished the main course. "At my age, these things become more important." Both leaned forward with sudden interest, their body language shifting from casual to predatory in an instant. "That's so wise, Mom," Jessica said. "It shows real maturity to think about the future and how to provide security for the people you love." "Have you been feeling unwell?" Marcus asked, his voice carefully modulated with concern. "You mentioned feeling tired lately, and at your age, it's important to make sure all your affairs are in order." I felt a chill at his words. The affairs in order comment seemed practiced, as if they'd rehearsed this conversation. "I have been feeling a bit overwhelmed with financial decisions," I admitted, testing their reaction. "Sometimes I wonder if I should have someone help me manage things more actively." Their eyes lit up like predators scenting prey. "Mom, that's exactly what Jessica and I have been discussing," Marcus said, reaching across to pat my hand. "Family should help family. We'd be honored to help you with any financial concerns." "Maybe it's time to consider power of attorney," Jessica added smoothly. "Just as a safety measure, of course, to protect you from anyone who might try to take advantage." The irony was breathtaking. "There is one immediate concern," I continued. "Marcus, you mentioned that emergency home repair situation. I have the check ready. $15,000 should cover the foundation work you described." I watched their faces carefully as I presented the check. Relief, excitement, and something else. A look between them that confirmed everything Morrison had discovered. "Mom, you're amazing," Marcus said, pocketing the check immediately. "This will solve everything. We're so grateful." "What exactly needs to be repaired?" I asked innocently. "I'd love to see the contractor's estimate." A moment of panic flickered across Marcus's face before he recovered. "Oh, you know how these things are. Multiple issues, very technical. The important thing is getting it handled quickly." After dinner, they insisted on cleaning up, which was unprecedented. I excused myself to rest, but instead positioned myself where I could hear their conversation in the kitchen. The recording device would capture everything, but I wanted to witness their true selves firsthand. "If we can get POA, we can control everything without waiting." Jessica's voice carried clearly from the kitchen. "She's getting more confused lately," Marcus replied. "Did you hear her talking about feeling overwhelmed with finances? This could work in our favor. How long do you think before we can get her declared incompetent? That house and all those investments just sitting there while we're struggling. The key is documenting her confusion and poor decisions. Maybe we start suggesting she's making mistakes, forgetting things. Build a case gradually." I stood frozen in the hallway, listening to my son and daughter-in-law plan my systematic emotional and financial destruction. The final test was complete, and they'd failed more spectacularly than I'd imagined possible. When they returned to the living room, I was seated peacefully in my chair, smiling warmly. "Thank you both for such a lovely afternoon," I said. "Family time is so precious, isn't it?" "Absolutely, Mom," Marcus said, bending to hug me goodbye. "We should do this more often, and remember, we're here for anything you need, anything at all." "I'll remember that," I replied, meaning it in ways they couldn't imagine. After they left, I sat in the growing darkness of my living room, processing what I'd witnessed. The people I'd raised, supported, and loved had spent the afternoon plotting my downfall while eating my food and accepting my money. But their performance had also been instructive. They'd revealed their complete strategy, claim I was mentally confused, obtain power of attorney through manufactured evidence of incompetence, and systematically strip away my autonomy while gaining control of my assets. It was a sophisticated plan that might have worked on someone without my background in corporate finance and strategic planning. Unfortunately for them, they'd chosen to manipulate someone who'd spent 40 years anticipating and countering exactly these types of schemes. As I listened to the recording of their kitchen conversation, I felt something settle into place. Not anger anymore, but cold, strategic clarity. They'd shown me exactly who they were when they thought I couldn't see or hear. Now it was time to show them exactly who Amelia Patterson was when her family mistook kindness for weakness. Tomorrow, Patricia and I would execute the most important financial strategy of my life. Tonight, I'd allow myself one glass of wine and the satisfaction of knowing that the biggest mistake Marcus and Jessica had ever made was underestimating a woman who'd built her wealth by staying 3 steps ahead of people exactly like them. The final test was complete. Now came the consequences. Monday morning arrived with the clarity that comes after difficult decisions. I'd spent the weekend reviewing Morrison's evidence, analyzing the recorded conversations, and planning my response with the same methodical approach I'd once used for corporate restructuring. The difference was that this time, the stakes were personal. Patricia's office felt different now, less like a friendly consultation and more like a war room where we'd plan the protection of everything I'd worked 40 years to build. Patricia, I want everything legally bulletproof. They cannot contest this. She spread the documents across her conference table. Estate modifications, trust structures, competency evaluations, and legal protections I'd never imagined needing against my own family. Amelia, what you're proposing is comprehensive, yes, and permanent. Once we execute these changes, there's no going back. Are you absolutely certain? I handed her the transcripts from Morrison's investigation and the recordings from Sunday's dinner. She read in silence, her expression shifting from professional concern to genuine anger. I'm not doing this out of spite, I said quietly. I'm doing this out of clarity. My son and daughter-in-law have shown me exactly what they think of me, and I'd be foolish to ignore that information. The legal strategy we developed was elegant in its completeness. All assets would transfer to a charitable remainder trust with me as the lifetime beneficiary. I'd maintain complete control and financial security for the rest of my life, but upon my death, everything would go to carefully selected charities rather than to people who saw my mortality as a business opportunity. The beauty of this structure, Patricia explained, is that it's irrevocable and uncontestable. Even if they claim diminished capacity, we have extensive documentation of your mental acuity, plus their own recorded statements about manipulating you. We established modest educational trusts for any future grandchildren, $50,000 each for college expenses, accessible only after age 25, and only with proof of academic progress. This ensured that innocent parties wouldn't suffer for their parents' greed, while preventing Marcus and Jessica from accessing funds through their children. The 5 charitable beneficiaries had been carefully chosen based on my volunteer work and personal values. The Sunrise Senior Center would receive the largest portion, enough to establish a permanent endowment for programs serving isolated elderly. The literacy program at the public library, the domestic violence shelter, the community food bank, and a scholarship fund for first-generation college students would each receive substantial bequests. My money will help people who actually need it, not fund luxury vacations and gambas. Debts, I told Patricia as we signed the final documents. These organizations understand the value of money because they've watched people suffer without it. Patricia had also arranged for comprehensive mental competency evaluations by 2 independent physicians specializing in geriatric psychology. Their reports, documenting my excellent cognitive function and decision-making capacity, would make any future claims of incompetence impossible to sustain. The timing is crucial, Patricia emphasized. We're making these changes in direct response to documented threats and manipulation attempts. This isn't capricious, it's protective. All passwords were changed, beneficiaries updated, and emergency contacts revised. Marcus and Jessica were removed from every financial account, insurance policy, and legal document. Patricia's firm became my primary emergency contact, with detailed instructions for handling any future manipulation attempts. The most satisfying change was updating my will's preamble. Instead of the standard language about loving family, it now included a detailed explanation of why these changes had become necessary, supported by documented evidence of Marcus and Jessica's deception and exploitation. Future generations will understand exactly why these decisions were made, I told Patricia. This isn't about punishment, it's about consequences for choices freely made. By Wednesday afternoon, every document was signed, filed, and legally bulletproof. Morrison had delivered his final report, complete with photographs, recordings, and financial documentation that painted a damning picture of systematic fraud and manipulation. The $15,000 check I'd given Marcus had been cashed within hours and traced to an online gambling account, not home repairs. Jessica's social media posts showed new designer purchases made that same weekend. Their casual disregard for my trust was documented in multiple formats, but the most important preparation was emotional, not legal. I'd had to accept that the son I'd raised no longer existed, if he ever had. The man who called me a burden while planning to exploit my love was a stranger wearing familiar features. That evening, I called Marcus to schedule one final family meeting. "Mom, is everything okay? You sound different." "I'm fine, dear. I just have some family business to discuss. Can you and Jessica come by Saturday afternoon? Say 2 o'clock? "Of course. Is this about the financial planning stuff you mentioned?" "Yes, Marcus. It's exactly about that." After hanging up, I sat in Robert's chair, looking at the photographs covering our mantelpiece. Marcus at his high school graduation, our wedding photo, family vacations from happier times. Tomorrow, I'd pack most of these away. Some memories were too painful to display when they'd been poisoned by betrayal. But I felt something I hadn't experienced in months: complete peace. The legal protections were in place, the evidence was overwhelming, and my future was secure. More importantly, I'd reclaimed my dignity and self-respect. Saturday's meeting would be difficult, but it would also be liberating. For the first time in years, I'd speak to Marcus and Jessica as equals rather than as someone they could manipulate and exploit. The strategic strike was complete. Now came the reckoning, and I was ready for it. Saturday afternoon arrived with unusual spring warmth, sunlight streaming through the living room windows where I'd arranged chairs in a semicircle. The setting looked casual, almost friendly, but the manila folder on my coffee table contained enough evidence to destroy any remaining illusions about family loyalty. Marcus and Jessica arrived precisely at 2, their enthusiasm palpable. They clearly expected this meeting to advance their financial interests, perhaps even to discuss the power of attorney arrangements they'd been planning. "Mom, you look wonderful," Jessica said, settling into her chair with the confidence of someone who believed she held all the advantages. "We're so excited to help with whatever you need to discuss. I have something to share with you both, and I need you to listen carefully," I began, my voice calm and measured. "Over the past month, I've learned some very interesting things about our family dynamics." I opened the folder and began placing documents on the coffee table: bank statements, credit reports, Morrison's surveillance photos, and transcripts of recorded conversations. Marcus's face went pale as he recognized his own credit card statements. "Mom, what is all this? Why do you have our personal financial information?" "Because, dear, when someone asks me for $100,000 to $80,000 over 3 years for various emergencies, I consider that my business as well as yours." I kept my voice level, professional. "Especially when those emergencies turn out to be gambling debts and luxury purchases, rather than the crises you described." Jessica's composure cracked first. "Amelia, you can't just investigate your own family like we're criminals." "I can when my family treats me like a mark in a confidence scheme." I picked up the transcript from their dinner party conversation. "Would you like me to read what you really think of me? The old lady won't live forever. That house alone is worth $800,000. The color drained from both their faces as I continued reading their own words back to them, their mockery of my neediness, their plans to claim mental incompetence, their research into power of attorney procedures. "You can't do this. I'm your son. That money belongs to our family," Marcus exploded, his mask of concerned child finally slipping completely. "Marcus, you called me a burden. Now you're free from that burden fortan." I reached for another set of documents, the new estate planning paperwork, already filed and legally binding. Effective immediately, my entire estate has been restructured. Upon my death, all assets will go to charitable organizations that actually value what I've built, rather than seeing it as an opportunity for exploitation. Jessica leaped from her chair. You can't be serious. We made mistakes. We said things we didn't mean, but we're family. Family doesn't plot to declare each other mentally incompetent for financial gain, I replied calmly. Family doesn't lie about emergencies to fund gambling addictions, and family certainly doesn't call each other burdens while planning to spend inheritance money before the funeral. Marcus was pacing now, his composure completely shattered. We can contest this. You're clearly not thinking rationally. This proves you need help managing your affairs. I handed him another document, the mental competency evaluations from 2 independent physicians. You're welcome to try. However, you'll find that I've been evaluated by 2 specialists who confirm excellent cognitive function and decision-making capacity. Your own recorded statements about manipulating me will be Exhibit A in any legal proceeding. The silence that followed was deafening. Marcus stared at the documents while Jessica sank back into her chair, finally understanding that their carefully planned exploitation had backfired completely. I raised you to be better than this, I continued, my voice heavy with disappointment. Your father would be ashamed of what you've become. We gave you every advantage, every opportunity, and you chose to become people who see kindness as weakness and family love as a business opportunity. Mom, please, Marcus said, his voice breaking. We can fix this. We can change. Give us another chance. You had 45 years of chances, Marcus. You chose to spend them becoming someone who calls his mother a burden and plots to steal her independence. I stood and walked to the window, looking out at the garden Robert and I had planted together decades ago. The saddest part is that you never needed to manipulate me. If you'd simply been honest, if you'd shown even basic respect and appreciation, I would have happily helped with anything you needed. But you chose deception over honesty, exploitation over love. The sound of Patricia's car in the driveway marked the end of our family meeting. I'd arranged for legal representation to be present for the final confrontation, knowing that desperate people make desperate choices. Patricia entered with 2 security guards I'd hired for the occasion, a precaution that proved wise when Marcus began threatening legal action and Jessica started screaming about family obligations. Mr. Patterson, Mrs. Patterson, Patricia said formally, I'm serving you with cease and desist orders regarding any future attempts to contact my client for financial assistance or to interfere with her legal affairs. Any violations will result in harassment charges. The security guards escorted them from my property while Marcus shouted threats about lawsuits and family loyalty. Jessica's last words were about how I'd regret this decision when I was old and alone. But as I watched them drive away, I felt only relief. For the first time in years, I was truly free from manipulation, guilt, and the exhausting effort of trying to maintain relationships with people who saw me as nothing more than a source of money. Patricia and I spent the next hour reviewing final legal protections and discussing potential challenges, but the documentation was comprehensive, the legal framework was solid, and my decision-making capacity was thoroughly established. How do you feel? Patricia asked as she prepared to leave. Liberated, I said without hesitation. I've spent 3 years since Robert died trying to maintain family connections that were already poisoned by greed. Now I can focus on relationships with people who actually value me as a person. That evening, I called the Sunrise Senior Center to increase my volunteer hours. I had more time now that I wasn't managing Marcus's manufactured crises, and I wanted to spend it with people who understood that respect and love couldn't be purchased. They had to be earned through character and genuine care. The reckoning was complete. The people I'd raised had chosen money over family, manipulation over love, and exploitation over respect. Now they'd live with the consequences of those choices, while I built a new life surrounded by people who valued wisdom, experience, and genuine human connection. For the first time in months, I slept peacefully, knowing that my assets were protected and my dignity was restored. The burden Marcus had complained about was gone, but it hadn't been me. It had been the weight of maintaining relationships with people who'd forgotten how to love anything that couldn't be deposited in a bank account. 6 months had passed since that Saturday afternoon confrontation, and the transformation in my daily life was remarkable. I woke each morning not to anxiety about manipulation and demands, but to the peaceful anticipation of meaningful work and genuine relationships. The Sunrise Senior Center had become my second home. 3 mornings a week, I taught basic financial literacy to seniors who'd never had the opportunity to learn investment strategies or retirement planning. My corporate finance background, once dismissed by my own family as quaint, was now genuinely valued by people eager to stretch their fixed incomes and protect themselves from scams. I wake up every morning knowing my life has meaning beyond being someone's ATM, I told my friend Margaret during our Tuesday coffee break. At 83, she'd become one of my closest companions, a former librarian whose children visited regularly, not for money, but because they genuinely enjoyed her company. "Amelia, you've given us so much more than money," she replied, gesturing toward the computer lab where seniors were learning digital banking safety. "You've given us hope and the tools to protect ourselves." The literacy program had grown exponentially with my involvement. Using teaching methods I developed during corporate training sessions, I helped adults overcome the shame of late-in-life learning. Watching a 50-year-old construction worker read his first complete book was worth more than any dividend I'd ever earned. Patricia called regularly with updates on Marcus's various legal attempts to contest the estate changes. Each effort had failed more completely than the last. "The recorded evidence is simply too overwhelming," she reported during our monthly review. "Their own words about manipulating you have made it impossible for any court to view their claims as legitimate." The most recent attempt had been particularly desperate, a claim that I'd been unduly influenced by her legal advice. The judge had dismissed it within hours, noting that the evidence showed I'd initiated the investigations and decisions entirely on my own. "Marcus has entered financial counseling," Patricia mentioned almost casually. "Apparently, losing access to your support forced him to confront his gambling addiction. His attorney mentioned it during settlement discussions." I felt a complex mix of emotions. Not satisfaction at his suffering, but hope that perhaps some good might come from the consequences of his choices. The 5 charitable beneficiaries of my estate had already begun receiving annual distributions from the trust structure. The impact was immediate and visible. New programs at the senior center, expanded literacy offerings, additional beds at the domestic violence shelter, and full scholarships for dozens of first-generation college students. "Mrs. Patterson, because of your endowment, we can serve twice as many families," said Carol Henderson, director of the Community Food Bank. "Your gift is literally keeping children fed and giving parents hope." These conversations were the opposite of my interactions with Marcus and Jessica. Instead of demands and manipulation, I received genuine gratitude and regular updates on how my support was creating positive change. My home felt different too. Without the constant anxiety about Marcus's next financial crisis or Jessica's passive-aggressive comments, I'd rediscovered the joy of my own space. The garden bloomed more beautifully than it had in years, perhaps because I now had the emotional energy to tend it properly. Sunday dinners had been replaced with weekly gatherings at the senior center, where I cooked for people who appreciated both the meal and the company. The conversations were rich and meaningful, discussions of books, shared memories, advice sought and given freely. I learned that respect isn't owed by age, it's earned by character, I reflected during one of these dinners. My age doesn't make me wise. My experiences do. And those experiences taught me that people who truly love you don't see your mortality as a business opportunity. The most unexpected gift was the role I'd developed as an informal counselor for other seniors facing family financial exploitation. Word had spread about my situation, and I regularly received calls from people experiencing similar manipulation. "Your story gave me courage to protect myself," said Eleanor Walsh, an 80-year-old widow whose son had been pressuring her to sell her home and move in with his family, not from love, but to access her equity. "I hired my own attorney and discovered he'd already forged my signature on loan documents." These conversations confirmed that my experience wasn't unique. Elder financicas. Al abuse was epidemic, enabled by social assumptions that aging meant diminished capacity, and that family relationships were always motivated by love rather than greed. I'd begun documenting these stories and working with Patricia to develop resources for seniors facing similar situations. The project would become part of my legacy, Practical guidance for people who'd spent their lives caring for others and now needed to learn how to protect themselves. Winter had been peaceful in ways I'd almost forgotten were possible. No emergency calls for money, no manufactured crises requiring immediate financial solutions, no guilt trips about family obligations or accusations of selfishness when I questioned expenses. Instead, I had quiet evenings with good books, meaningful volunteer work, and relationships built on mutual respect rather than financial dependency. The house felt lighter somehow, as if removing the weight of manipulation had physically changed the atmosphere. I'd redecorated Robert's study, transforming it from a shrine to our shared past into a workspace for my senior advocacy projects. As spring returned, I realized I'd never been happier or more purposeful. The family I'd lost through their own choices had been replaced by a chosen family of friends who valued my wisdom, experience, and genuine care for others. The transformation was complete. From victim to advocate, from enabler to protector, from someone who measured worth through others' approval to someone who knew her own value, independent of anyone else's recognition. I'd learned the most important lesson of my 73 years. True family isn't determined by blood, but by love, respect, and genuine care for each other's well-being. When blood relatives fail that test, we have the right and responsibility to create our own chosen family, built on the values that actually matter. The morning of my 73rd birthday dawned with golden sunlight streaming through windows I'd opened to welcome spring air. Exactly 1 year had passed since that devastating dinner at Bellacourt restaurant, and the contrast was extraordinary. My dining room table was set for 12, not for family by blood, but for family by choice. Margaret arrived first, carrying her famous apple cake and wearing the sweater her daughter had knitted. Tom and Helen, married 62 years, brought photographs from their recent cruise, a trip they'd afforded through better financial planning after our literacy program. David, the construction worker who'd learned to read at age 53, carried a wrapped book, his own short story collection, published by a local press. "A year ago, I thought I was losing my family," I said as we gathered around the table. "Instead, I found my purpose." The conversation flowed naturally, touching on books we'd read, programs we'd developed, and lives we'd watched transform through education and mutual support. These people knew my story, not as entertainment, but as shared experience that had taught us all about resilience and self-worth. "Money doesn't create character, but it certainly reveals it," Margaret observed, as we discussed a recent case of elder financial abuse that had made local news. "Your courage in protecting yourself gave the rest of us permission to value ourselves properly." After lunch, I shared updates on the charitable work that would define my lasting legacy. The Patterson Foundation, officially established 6 months earlier, had already distributed over $200,000 to carefully vetted programs serving vulnerable populations. The scholarship recipients sent regular letters, young people whose gratitude reminded me why I'd chosen education over exploitation. Maria Santos, studying nursing while working 2 jobs, wrote, "Mrs. Patterson, your scholarship means I can focus on learning to heal people instead of worrying about textbook costs. Thank you for believing in strangers like me." The domestic violence shelter had opened a new wing, providing safe housing for women escaping abuse with their children. The literacy program had expanded to serve 3 neighboring communities. The food bank had purchased a refrigerated truck, allowing them to rescue and distribute fresh produce that had previously gone to waste. "Your investments are paying dividends in ways the stock market never could," said Patricia, who'd joined us for dessert. She brought news that Marcus had completed his financial counseling program and found stable employment, not the high-paying position his ego preferred, but honest work that allowed him to support his family without deception. "Jessica filed for divorce last month," Patricia added quietly. "Apparently, losing access to your financial support forced them both to confront some difficult truths about their marriage and priorities. I felt no satisfaction in their struggles, but I appreciated the confirmation that consequences had led to necessary changes. Sometimes the greatest gift we can give people is allowing them to experience the results of their choices without intervention." The afternoon brought cards and emails from around the country, responses to the story I'd begun sharing through senior advocacy networks. Hundreds of people had contacted me about similar family situations, and many had taken steps to protect themselves after reading about my experience. I hope other parents will remember, love doesn't mean enabling, I'd written in my advocacy newsletter. The response had been overwhelming. Seniors who'd been afraid to set boundaries with manipulative adult children, finally finding courage to say no to exploitation disguised as family obligation. Evening came peacefully. My chosen family departed with hugs, promises to call soon, and invitations to various activities throughout the week. Margaret's book club on Tuesday, the senior center's monthly dinner on Friday, Helen's art class on Sunday. My calendar was full of meaningful engagement with people who valued my time and presence. I sat in Robert's chair, my chair now, reviewing thank you letters from scholarship recipients and shelter residents. Each represented a life improved through resources that Marcus and Jessica had seen only as their personal entitlement. One letter particularly moved me. Dear Mrs. Patterson, because of your scholarship, I became the first person in my family to graduate college. I'm now teaching elementary school in my hometown, helping children who remind me of myself. Your investment didn't just change my life, it's changing the lives of every child I'll teach. Thank you for proving that strangers can be family when they choose to care about each other's dreams. This was legacy. Not just money transferred after death, but resources used during life to create positive change that would ripple through generations. The Patterson Foundation would continue this work long after I was gone. The seniors I'd taught would teach others. The families fed by the food bank would remember kindness and pass it forward. The women sheltered from violence would raise children who understood that love and respect were inseparable. Marcus's inheritance hadn't disappeared. It had been multiplied exponentially and shared with people who would use it to build rather than consume, to help rather than exploit, to create hope rather than dependency. As I prepared for bed, I reflected on the courage required to choose self-respect over family harmony. It hadn't been easy to accept that the son I'd raised was gone, replaced by someone who saw relationships as financial opportunities, but acknowledging that truth had freed me to build authentic connections with people who shared my values. The bedroom felt peaceful as I settled in for sleep. No anxiety about manufactured emergencies or demands for money. No guilt about failing to provide enough for people who would never have enough. No fear about growing older alone, because I wasn't alone. I was surrounded by genuine care and mutual respect. Tomorrow would bring new opportunities to serve, teach, and advocate. The Patterson Foundation needed review. The literacy program required expansion planning, and 3 new seniors had requested financial education sessions. My 73rd year stretched ahead with purpose, meaning, and the deep satisfaction that comes from knowing your life matters, not because of what you possess, but because of what you give, and how you help others discover their own worth. The legacy lived on, growing stronger every day through countless acts of kindness, education, and empowerment. This was what family really meant. Not shared DNA, but shared commitment to each other's highest good. As I finish sharing this story with you, I want to address something directly to everyone watching, especially those of you dealing with similar family situations. Where are you watching from? Please let me know in the comments, because your location and your story matter to me. Over the past year, I've received thousands of messages from people around the world who recognize their own experiences in mine. Seniors being manipulated by adult children, parents enabling destructive behavior in the name of love, families torn apart by greed disguised as need. If someone calls you a burden, believe them and free them from carrying you. This isn't about anger or revenge. It's about clarity and self-protection. When people show you who they are through their actions and woe. RDS, believing them is an act of wisdom, not cynicism. The most common question I receive is, how did you find the courage to cut off your own son? But that's not what happened. I didn't cut off Marcus. I stopped enabling his manipulation and protected myself from exploitation. The relationship ended because he chose financial gain over genuine love, not because I chose money over family. Your worth isn't measured by your wallet, but by your willingness to respect yourself. For those of you facing similar situations, here are some practical steps. First, document everything. Keep records of loans, gifts, and financial assistance. Note patterns of manipulation, false emergencies, and disrespectful behavior. This isn't about building a case against your family. It's about protecting yourself with facts. Second, establish legal protections. Work with an attorney who specializes in elder law and asset protection. Update your estate planning to reflect current realities rather than hopeful fantasies. Consider mental competency evaluations if family members are questioning your decision-making capacity. Third, build genuine relationships outside your family. Volunteer for organizations that value your experience and wisdom. Develop friendships based on mutual respect rather than financial dependency. Create chosen family with people who appreciate you as a person, not as a source of resources. Fourth, remember that love doesn't require sacrifice of dignity. Healthy relationships involve mutual respect, honest communication, and genuine care for each other's well-being. If someone only contacts you when they need money, that's not love, it's exploitation. The hardest lesson I learned was that enabling destructive behavior isn't kindness. It's cruelty to everyone involved. By continuing to rescue Marcus from the consequences of his choices, I was preventing him from developing genuine character and responsibility. Sometimes the most loving thing we can do is allow people to experience the results of their decisions. My charitable work has shown me what genuine gratitude looks like. When someone truly appreciates help, they use it to improve their situation and often find ways to help others. When someone feels entitled to help, they use it to maintain destructive patterns while demanding more. The Patterson Foundation now serves as an example of what's possible when resources are directed toward people who understand their value. Instead of funding luxury vacations and gambling debts, my money helps families escape poverty through education, provides shelter for abuse victims, and offers hope to people who've never experienced genuine support. Thank you for listening to my story. I hope it helps you write a better ending to yours. To those of you facing family financial manipulation, you are not alone, you are not wrong to protect yourself, and you have the right to surround yourself with people who value you properly. Age and family relationship don't obligate you to accept disrespect or exploitation. Don't forget to subscribe to this channel and share your own experiences in the comments. Your stories help others feel less isolated and more empowered to make necessary changes. The most important thing I've learned is that true family honors and protects each other. When blood relatives fail that test, we have both the right and the responsibility to create our own chosen family built on mutual respect and genuine care. If my story has resonated with you, please share it with others who might need to hear it. Sometimes the greatest gift we can give someone is the knowledge that they're not alone, and that choosing self-respect over people-pleasing is not only acceptable, it's necessary. Remember, you are worthy of love, respect, and relationships that honor your value as a human being. Don't settle for less, regardless of who's asking you to. Thank you for watching, for your support, and for sharing this journey with me. Together, we can help each other build lives of dignity, purpose, and genuine connection. Your voice matters. Your experience matters, and your choice to value yourself properly matters more than you might realize, not just for you, but for everyone whose life you touch through your example of courage and self-respect. This story is dedicated to every senior who has ever been made to feel like a burden by people who should have treasured them as a blessing. Your wisdom, experience, and love have value that can't be measured in dollars, and you deserve relationships that recognize and honor that truth.